Jason Opelski from Burrillville, Rhode Island. And it's okay, I've got some materials to pass out to you guys tonight.
Are you a resident or not?
I'm a resident of Burrillville.
Okay.
So let me walk you quickly through what I delivered to you there. There's four main exhibits. The first one is a fact sheet that the residents of Burrillville have put together about the effects of the power plant. The second one is a map that highlights some of the areas in a 5-mile radius of impact. The third exhibit is a letter from the Conservation Law Foundation that addresses the need for the power plant and why there in fact is not a need for the power plant, and why both the need and the ratepayer savings and the tax impact have all been significantly overblown. And then the last exhibit in there is a letter that the Town Council of Burrillville back in August of 2000 sent the Energy Facility Siting Board regarding a proposed power plant in Smithfield, Rhode Island. It's an example of some very strong language that the Town Council of Burrillville put forth in 2000, and essentially we're asking for help from our neighbors of a similar sort. So with that in mind, let me start some of my prepared comments here. As I mentioned, my name is Jason Opelski. I am a resident of Burrillville, and I wanted to thank you. I want to thank the board for their time and the opportunity to address you this evening on this really very important topic. First, I wanted to tell you why I, a citizen of Burrillville, drove all the way across the border to come and talk to our friends in Connecticut today. Family. My family, your family, our family, the families of everybody in the region, and the fact that at some point we need to stand up, take a stand to protect our families against the interests that would do us harm in the name of profits and supposed need for energy and all things like that. I'm not an environmental activist at all. I just work in corporate America. This project came into my backyard, into my neighborhood, caused us all in Burrillville to examine what's really going on here. Our eyes were opened to this that's happening, and we're essentially trying to educate all of our friends, neighbors, and neighboring towns. So I wanted to discuss the project for Burrillville known as the Clear River Energy Center. And one thing, before I begin, I think it's important to call out, I don't make any money if the plant is built. I don't make any money if the plant is not built. Again, I'm just a private resident, citizen of Burrillville. And let me tell you first, let me give you some context for why we need your help. Because I think the default reaction from everyone is to say, well, why can't Burrillville just vote this plant down? Why can't your town council just vote this plant down? And so it's important for you guys to understand our laws in Burrillville as it relates to what's called the Energy Facility Siting Act. This was an act, a law that was put in motion in the early 80s, back when the situation was much different. Our country had rolling brownouts. We had an extreme need for additional power plants. And everybody realized, I think people would prefer not to have a power plant near them, but the country needed to have energy. We had a severe lack at that point. And so the federal government strongly encouraged all states to adopt a version of the Energy Facility Siting Act so that they could determine if there is this great need. Once the need is developed and confirmed for the power plant, then where is the least impactful place in the state to put this plant? The idea is that they would do studies, they'd do analysis and research to determine, okay, if we're going to put a power plant in our state, if we have to put a power plant in our state, where is the least impactful place to put it? This is the genesis and the origins of this particular act. In Rhode Island, it's been changed very little since it was instituted, but that's the spirit of it. The Energy Facility Siting Board is made up of 3 members only. All 3 of these members ultimately are reports to the governor. They're appointees by the governor. They sit on this board as spelled out by the law. They're not appointed to this board by the governor. Their roles are spelled out as this board. So they are the sole decision maker in this particular process. The town of Burrillville has no formal say. The lawmakers have no formal say. The town council has no formal say, and the citizens of Burrillville have no formal say. We are relegated to an advisory opinion by our town, and not even an advisory opinion of the town, an advisory opinion of our zoning and planning boards as to some very specific questions about how it impacts, potentially impacts variances, and is it consistent with our strategic plan. So those are the only things that our town has actually asked for. So we are left to educate everyone and to serve in an advisory capacity and a watchdog capacity for the board as they move through the Energy Facility Siting Board, as they move through this particular process that we have to work within. So we have to ask for help. Here we are asking you guys for help, because part of the reason that the Energy Facility Siting Board makes up their mind is to consider inputs from a variety of sources, of boards, of bodies, of other states and towns. And the way that they consider that is by you guys adopting a resolution and sending a letter to the Energy Facility Siting Board opposing or supporting a particular plan. So I think it's important to give you that background, because often when we talk to people, people say, well, why don't you just vote the plant down if you don't want it? I can assure you the people of Burrillville do not want this plant. I don't know if you've driven through Burrillville lately. There are signs pretty much every other yard opposing the plant. If we could vote it down, we certainly would. So I'd like to move into really explaining some additional details of the plant. She did a fantastic job of talking about the kind of cumulative impact of a number of plants here. So for me, and I think in the jobs that you guys do, the health and safety of our citizens, from the strongest of them to the weakest of them, and the protection of the environment, the protection of natural resources, and our strategic, sustainable planning and economic development are really issues that affect us all. We are close neighbors in this tri-state area, so really this is all our backyard. You hear people talk about not in my backyard. You know, we're really in this together in the tri-state area. In fact, as this map and my map will highlight, the proposed plant is exactly 3 miles from Quantock State Park and only 2 miles from the state forest. And even where we sit here tonight, which I think technically is about as far away from Burrillville as we could be and still be in Thompson, I think is about how that works. And we're still only 10.5 miles away. So very, very close to this particular plant. And therefore, the plant is really an important issue that affects us all. So if I could direct you to Exhibit 1, you'll find a fact sheet that outlines the negative impact of the proposed plant with information that is directly taken from the application itself. You'll notice the following items as you look from top to bottom. You'll notice the amount of hazardous chemicals that will be released from this plant. 52 known hazardous pollutants. 52 known pollutants, including 3 tons of hazardous pollutants. They're formally classified as hazardous pollutants by the EPA, by the way. You'll notice the large number of local areas within only a 5-mile radius that are going to be impacted. That includes numerous bodies of water, 26 conservation land areas, 25 state recreation areas, 15 historic districts, 8 conservation areas, and many, many campgrounds and youth campgrounds, as you guys well know. In fact, some of those areas that I quoted reside in your town. You'll also see the number of impacts, the number of residents impacted in communities directly surrounding the plant, over 100,000 people. And you'll see the hundreds of combined acres that are going to be clear-cut to make way for this particular project. When you add in the footprint of the plant itself, when you add in the access way that they have to cut through, 6 miles of 150-foot wide track for power lines, you're looking at over 200 combined acres. And this isn't just any sort of acreage. This is beautiful interior forest that's required for certain species to mate and migrate. This is an important part of our nature. You'll also see in that forest that there are threatened species and a large number of wetlands that are impacted. Furthermore, you'll see the massive amount that this plant will use on a daily basis. In the summer, the plant will use about 222,000 gallons. In the winter, upwards of almost 1 million gallons of water a day. That's because in the winter, they have to run on diesel fuel when the pipeline capacity is restricted and needs to be prioritized for home heating. So they have to have a backup winter source, which is diesel fuel. When they run on diesel, they consume significantly more water and they emit significantly more emissions because of this. In fact, the ISO has already said we have a pipeline capacity problem in our region. We're overbuilt with natural gas, and suggesting, we need to stop with natural gas or build more pipelines. Obviously, if you build more pipelines, you see what happens. We get more plants because of that. You'll also see the fact that they plan to use a contaminated water source, a source that's contaminated with MTBE. I don't know how many of you were tuned in to the disaster that happened in Burrillville many years ago with the MTBE contamination. I was not a resident at the time. I can tell you, though, from the stories of the people in our town, the stories of my family, that it was absolutely horrible. Sickness, illness, increased cancer rates, people bathing outside like refugees. It was not a pretty time for the state. And so we're very sensitive about opening that well that was sealed by court order and doing anything that would cause that MTBE to potentially affect us and anyone else in the region again. And lastly, you will see clearly that this one plant alone will result in a dramatic increase in our regional CO2 emissions, making it literally impossible to ever meet the goals set forth in the Resilient Rhode Island Act. Now, the Resilient Rhode Island Act does not directly impact you, it's our state act, but this is Rhode Island's commitment to together reduce greenhouse emissions, the things that contribute to global warming, which is a well-understood scientific fact at this point. Now, proponents of the fact of the plant will tell you that longer term, this will actually reduce regional emissions due to the ability to displace older plants in the region, but there are zero guarantees of that happening. And, as I mentioned, the ISO, New England ISO, company that controls the grid, has said themselves that we currently have an over-reliance on natural gas in our region, resulting in pipeline constraints, and which has had a measurable negative impact on regional air emissions already. So while we were tracking down for a while, we're now starting to track back up. So I would point you towards Exhibit 2. Okay, so I live in Thompson, Connecticut. I don't live in Rhode Island. How does this affect me? I think that this does a better job than I could really explain as to how this affects you here in the state. As you can clearly see, Thompson is not all that far from the site of the proposed plant. And in fact, as I mentioned, a number of areas of impact that are cited in the application reside in your town, within your state. And at some point, with the existing power plants already, a major pipeline in the area, multiple compressor stations, adding a second plant, massive plant, to this mix starts to get us to a critical mass. So this is no longer a viable ecotourism site. It's no longer a viable recreation site. It becomes an industrialized area. That will hurt our regional economy. That will hurt our lifestyle and our way of life, and really change us forever. I think the question is, do we want to be industrialized? Do we want to see these things disappear? And in fact, I think one of the things that's saddest about this situation is that your town gets all of the negative impact and none of the benefits. Frankly, if the plant is built, Rhode Island gets some impact. We get some revenue, Burrillville gets some revenue. That's not to be denied. It's been overstated, but it's not to be denied. You guys get nothing out of this. All you get is the negative impacts from that, which is why we think it's very important for you guys to become educated and to support this opposition. And even if you aren't terribly concerned with global warming and the potential impact on our region, it's important to note, as stated earlier, that air and water pollution know no boundaries. They don't respect state boundaries. And as I mentioned earlier, we're only 10.5 miles away from the proposed site. In Exhibit 3, I wanted to touch on one thing and one thing only. You will hear a lot of chatter from the proponents of this plan about jobs, some tax revenue, but mostly, you'll hear about the need and how soon we won't be able to run our iPhones, our air conditioners, or plug in anything anymore. And I urge you not to be swayed by these scare tactics and not to be distracted. You need to be aware that up and down the pipeline, there are plants going in Massachusetts and in Connecticut. In the coming years, this region is going to see a surge in both electricity and, frankly, emissions because of this. ISO themselves has predicted a 0.2% decline in electricity usage in this region due to both efficiency and the positive impact of the renewables coming online. So I urge you to weigh the risks against the rewards, and if we want to focus on need, let us focus on the need for access to clean water. We do have other means of making electricity today. we do not have other means of making clean drinking water. My father's a man I respect. I happen to be a child of the 70s, the late 70s, and my father's really a grown-up hippie, as some of you might be, and he vaguely remembers Woodstock. I'm told that anyone that was at Woodstock doesn't actually remember it directly, but he now works for one of the largest consulting firms in the world. And as we've been pulled into this issue and into this process, I often think about his words to me just a few short years ago, speaking as someone himself deeply entrenched in the corporate world, like I am. He said, "We thought we were going to change the world. Instead, look what we have built. How did it all go so wrong?" And lastly, and in closing, in Exhibit 4, you'll see in 2000, the Burrillville Town Council submitted the letter that I've provided you as an example. They sent it in strong opposition to the proposed Index power plant at the time. And if you're anything like our Burrillville Town Council, you are good people who ran for office to make a difference and to provide leadership. And I can tell you from the time that my family has spent in Thompson that that is true and correct. Sometimes in life, I feel like you have the opportunity to take a stand and do the right thing. Now is just one of those times. I urge you to join with organizations, conservation commissions, environmental groups that have come out in opposition to the proposed plan. I urge you to support Burrillville, as Burrillville has supported others in the past, by adopting a resolution against the proposed plant and submitting that resolution to the Energy Facility Siting Board. I am sure that the Thompson Conservation Commission will be happy to draft such a resolution focusing on the more salient points. So in closing, I'd like to remind us, really, that New England is the home of innovation. We're the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. We can do better than this. There are other options. We don't need to double down on fossil fuels and commit us into that for the next several decades. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your consideration, and I urge you to work with the town on drafting a resolution in opposition to the plan.